Good morning. Well, for me, it's good morning. I'm Daniel Moss. I'm calling in from Boston, Massachusetts in the US. I know probably most of you it's afternoon. And for our panelists, it's evening in Africa. So welcome to all. Again, just if you're just arriving and would like to introduce yourself in the chat function at the bottom of your Zoom screen, please do. It'd be nice to see who's in the room this afternoon. My name is Daniel Moss. I'm co-director of the Agroecology Fund, and I have the great honor this afternoon, to introduce a panel entitled Growing Support for African Agroecology Enterprises. So you might have seen the description of the session today. But what we're going to talk about is support for small-scale and localized agroecological enterprises. They face a lot of challenges in their birth and support to be successful, to be able to really be the backbone of a transformed food system. And in this session, we're going to explore the research and actions of the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa to support these under-resourced yet vital and dynamic agroecological enterprises. And we have a really interesting panel this morning, and I'm going to introduce, and I'm just going to look here. We're waiting on one panelist, but we're going to go ahead with our two esteemed panelists that are with us, and we may be joined by Charles Dhewa from Zimbabwe, who seems to be having a bit of technological challenge. But just in any case, I'm going to introduce Charles so that you know who he is. So the first panelist is Charles Dhewa from Knowledge Transfer Africa, based in Zimbabwe. And his organization works at the intersection of formal and informal agricultural markets across Africa. So we hope Charles will be along to join us. But who is with us currently, and we're very much grateful for their presence and look forward to hearing from them. First is Judith Bakira. Judith was born in the Bugosa district of Uganda, from where she's joining us today. And she was raised on a farm, and using her own savings and small loan funds from a village savings and loan association, she founded what is now the Buseno Fruit and Trees Company, an agro-heritage fruit farm of more than 1,000 acres with a heavy emphasis on agro-tourism and education regarding environmentally sustainable farming practices. In 2019, this led her to be recognized as one of the BBC's 100 Women of the Year. Really looking forward to hearing Judith's story. And then the final speaker will be Charles Milose Olwene, who works with the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, who's been carrying out this work, coordinating this work with this African Agroecological Enterprises Initiative. And Charles is the advocacy and campaign coordinator for AFSA, the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa. So without further ado, I'm going to turn, we do have Charles with us. Charles, I don't know if you were able to jump right in and kick us off.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, Charles Dhewa, thank you very much.
Well, apologies, it has been raining here. Can you hear me?
We hear you fine, thank you.
Thank you. I've just been navigating some rain, so sorry for that. Yes, I missed part of your introduction, Dan, but I'm not sure how many minutes I should speak or...
Yeah, why don't you take about 7 minutes initially. We'll try to get around, and then we'll come back around to each of the panelists.
Sure. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm glad to be part of this interesting conversation. So I work from mass markets, mainly territorial markets. So it's from that vantage point that I see different types of entrepreneurships happening in Africa, mainly agricultural-related entrepreneurships. And to be specific, agroecology. Well, being a member of AFSA as well, I've had the opportunity to really try to look at the difference between industrial agriculture and agroecology and different forms of production systems that are being promoted in Africa. So it is from that sphere that we are seeing the growth of what we call agroecology entrepreneurs. Maybe to define it as a field first, it has got its own characteristics. Agroecology, entrepreneurship, it tries to promote food sovereignty, better eating habits. People are getting tired of food systems that really don't change lives. From even an economic perspective, from an income perspective, most farmers in Africa have been producing using industrial agriculture, big given inputs. All these contracts, they've not been solving problems. So people are beginning to ask questions and say, maybe what would be the alternative ways of producing food, which is also climate friendly, which is where agroecology is coming in. While production has been quite relatively easy moving on, we see that on the entrepreneurship side is where issues really need to start happening. For instance, innovations around what is produced. But then looking at this kind of subject, I think there are two types of entrepreneurship that I see when I work from the markets. The first one is knowledge-driven services. This is where you find many actors like NGOs, civil society organizations, and even community-based organizations. They are trying to talk about agroecology as an enterprise, as a way of sharing knowledge, but in a creative way. So there is a lot of work happening there. We have many, even some of the academics that are trying to understand agroecology, designing new terms. And why this is important is because the agroecology field is still replete with a number of technologies that are still confusing for some people. When people talk about organic agriculture, some farmers ask, is this agroecology or what? When you talk about climate smart agriculture, is this the same? So all these kinds of questions mean we are still going to need people who are going to be entrepreneurial in explaining what we mean by agroecology. To me, this looks like a really field building, like building the field of agroecology as a decent and legitimate space, and even some kind of ideology where you want to do things in a specific way, which can compete with industrial agriculture. Otherwise, if we don't really explain it in different ways, people will not see opportunities in agroecology. So I find this knowledge services type of entrepreneurship very important in expanding the sphere, explaining what we mean, even the differences. And this will help us in even dealing with co-option. There are many ways in which industrial agriculture is trying to co-opt agroecology and say, by the way we're doing it, although it might not be real agroecology, they are trying to sell their inputs, sell fertilizer, seed, but by co-opting and labeling some of their practices agroecology. So it's only through these entrepreneurs who will be really explaining this field that we are able to see which are the boundaries, which are the opportunities to grow. But then another type of agroecology that I see is to do with the real commodities, producing real food agroecologically. For instance, small grains, groundnuts, and even chickens in an agroecology way. Where is the market? That's a big question. So this is where I see other entrepreneurs emerging. It's a very small field, but they are still emerging very well, where we have small companies that are trying to market commodities that are produced agroecologically. Some of these actors are in territorial markets that are a big part of Africa. So we see a lot of innovation around trying to sell, to market, to properly package indigenous food, which is produced organically, and say to the consumers, here's what you need. This is important because in some cases we see a lot of consumers are now beginning to ask questions and say, if I want to buy indigenous food or agroecologically produced food in volumes, is it available? Can I get it throughout the year? So this is a very important space which is growing in Africa. We see a lot of support from funders, from the West, from everywhere, even some of the financial institutions like formal banks are getting interested in trying to support that, but only at a small scale. But we don't see big banks really getting into it, like the Africa Development Bank. By now, it would be supporting agroecology, having a wing for agroecology. That's what we would lobby for, but I'm sure they are still thinking about it. But I think most of their funds and support is going to industrial agriculture, all these big value chains that are being supported, but very narrow. If you look at agroecology, it's quite broad and provides diversity, food diversity, which you find in markets. So this is another space that we see agroecology, entrepreneurship happening in these two strands. Of course, there are many, but there are already synergies between the first group of people who are trying to explain agroecology and then the other group that is trying to really now sell, to provide food. Especially the big market is for young people who are beginning to ask questions and say, look, we are tired of some of these foods that are not really healthy. Where is the alternative? Unless you provide the alternative, people are still going to worry about it. So I'm glad that this field is actually expanding, and with the right support, with the right business models, really. And I see opportunities for this other sector for commodity-driven agroecology really expanding. And most of it is happening in the territorial markets of Africa. I'm sure I don't think I've exhausted my 7 minutes. Over to you, Dan.
Charles, that was in fact 6 minutes. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
So, Charles, thank you so much for giving us that kind of overview of, what are agroecological enterprises and what are some of the challenges and opportunities out there, both with producers and with consumers. That's really helpful. And we thank you also for all of the writing and intellectual work and research you've done about this. It's really an important area to understand this sector better, because in that sense, we'll understand better how to support it. So now we have the chance to hear from, I think the kind of person that Charles described, which is an agroecological entrepreneur. So let's go over to Uganda and hear from Judith Bakira. Thank you, Judith.
Hello, good evening here from Africa, and good morning, everybody. You're welcome to this presentation. I'm making the presentation from Uganda, that is Eastern Africa, and I am an agro-entrepreneur. And who are we agro-entrepreneurs? We are a mix of micro, small, and medium enterprises, and the majority of us are very small, though they are the medium enterprises and the small ones. We are usually acting as small enterprises at the community level, and usually not registered, but we do a lot of production, trading, and retailing, and do a lot of artisanal processing. How are we organized? As entrepreneurs, we coexist in a number of networks. As micro enterprises, we are into social networks at the village level, and this one carries a lot of social capital. But then as small enterprises, we tend to have to operate at a higher level, what you'd call a local government. That is a bigger political unit. And then as medium-sized enterprises, we are usually fewer than the rest of the small and the micro, and we tend to operate at a national level. So we are usually in associations, in networks, and collaborative linkages that operate at a national level. How do we operate? We often work in a confusing and contradictory national, regional, and international policy environment. Why do I have to say this? Because take the example in Uganda, we say there is a policy called Build Uganda, Buy Uganda, which is said Bubu. But now there is this new thing that has come up, the African Continental Free Trade Area. But if we are to act and buy Uganda, and yet there is the bigger free trade area, and they contradicting policy environments, then the rising population, where we need to feed the whole world, and yet we must remain green. And of course, we have frequent emergencies and risks, and these have their effects on our enterprises. For example, COVID, locusts, and floods. What are our production modalities? We are largely smallholder-based at production, processing, and marketing. And we produce seasonally using largely rain-fed agriculture. Our equipment is largely very basic, hand, manual, and later solar-powered. This equipment is largely affordable, like the hand hoe, requiring low skill and little maintenance. What are the food systems? We diversify into crops, animals, birds, and fish. In my local language, Uganda, we call it katogo, where you mix everything. And then we integrate bananas, beans, peas, fruits, and coffee. And these systems are based on indigenous and now low external input food production systems. And in there, because we are losing it now, there is inbuilt sustainable food production system that has both backward and forward linkages. How do we market? We have very limited product branding, labeling, and differentiation. We operate both in localized and territorial markets, and also rely on middlemen. Actually, they are men, not women in actual sense, to market our products, often at unfavorable terms. How is financing? Largely using limited resources of savings of the entrepreneurs. Their small-sized enterprises sometimes receive credit from microfinance institutions. Medium-sized enterprises often get loans from commercial banks, but with very high interest rates. Governments are starting to pick interest and offer financing through revolving funds or interest loans through development banks. What are the emerging opportunities? Commercial banks are getting on board in Eastern Africa. For example, the Stanbic Bank is currently partnering with the French Embassy in Uganda to support agroecology and ecotourism. Then there's the Agriculture Fund, Agroecology Fund. It is designing a creative and participatory way of supporting agroecology enterprises in Africa. Then government of Uganda has developed the parish development model, where groups of villagers are being encouraged to come together and identify agriculture enterprises they can do together. In Kenya, the devolution policy enables local level initiatives to be funded. In the Ministry of Agriculture in Uganda, there is a section promoting biofertilizer and encouraging enterprises also to produce some. There are a few NGOs in Africa, such as Pelham, which are supporting indigenous seeds use, its multiplication and storage, an opportunity for agroecology enterprises. Then there's the adoption of technologies, where affordable and appropriate sizes are being innovated for use in the gardens. For example, the ox plow and small hand tractors. Then there's evidence-based research. As enterprises generate information, stories of change and impact, they are now partnering with universities and with African-wide organizations like AFSA, Biodivision Africa, to document and publish stories of change. Then some organizations like VI Agroforestry, based in Sweden, and Trees for the Future are promoting integration of indigenous trees, food, and animals using permaculture principles. Uganda government has passed a law on traditional and herbal medicine as an act of parliament. Then we have COVID-19 has brought an opportunity for people in Africa especially to consume traditional foods and plants that have immune boosters and with medicinal values and that are not processed as such. Then we have a number of exhibitions, trade fairs, agriculture markets that are meeting points where agroecology enterprises have an opportunity to sell their branded products. Where are the gaps in the market? Grants and loans at the national and international levels do not specifically target agroecology enterprises. Number two, standards. Organic standards are defined currently, but broadly, agroecological standards are not yet developed. Agroecology enterprise businesses and learning, they are usually consumed, especially these micro, small, into day-to-day survival and hardly have the time, space, and know-how to grow their enterprises, document human and business stories of change, and impact. Households are abandoning traditional models of work that are mutually symbiotic and with the predictable systems. Then there is the landscape is filled with the stories of either stagnation or failed enterprises, especially here in Africa, that have been pushed or have pushed themselves into mechanical collaborations with others. These collaborations have failed because there has not been a lot of thinking that have gone through. And also people have not first internalized their internal collaboration within areas that they manage, and they go for bigger collaborations, okay? So what are the recommendations? We need to deepen learning, increasing interest in Africa agroecology enterprises that could provide an enabling landscape for different enterprises to move towards each other, build business relationships, out of each of which fruitful collaborations can occur. For example, like the AFSA one that has taken lead in the whole of Africa. Then we have medium-sized AEs to work towards being transitional catalysts, because we talked of micro, small, and medium, and we are thinking that the medium-sized enterprises can become transitional catalysts that build a bridge between the small and the wider environment of policies, of finance, so that they help to deliver appropriate finance skills and competences to the smaller ones. Okay, and then other international partners to support affordable finance, skills enhancement, and broader policy influence. And then we want to get agroecology enterprises into technology, especially if you think of the ordinary rural person. We have to usher them into technology, which we've been either forced into or we have to go into because of COVID. That is the use of FM radios, the use of social media, the whole area of teleconferencing, okay? Very, very important in this new era. And then last is accessing affordable finance, non-financial resources, appropriate equipment, and customized training. Thank you so much for listening. And my paper is available and the contact is there below. You can visit my website, www.basinofruits.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Judith. That was really rich. So much, really getting into the needs from the perspective of an entrepreneur about the opportunities and needs of growing this important sector. I hope, Judith, thank you for taking a brief time to present, but maybe we can come back to you and hear a little bit more about your company and about the kind of production and marketing that you use as a small agroecological enterprise. So we'll get back to you. But okay, before we do that, we're going to pass the microphone over to Charles Mulozi Olwene from the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa that has been developing an initiative to support Judith and other agroecological entrepreneurs. So go take it away, Charles.
Hi, Daniel. Thank you so much, Daniel, and great appreciations to my fellow panelists. Things that have made my presentation much easier because they have touched in most of the things that I was supposed to talk about. Also, hi, all the listeners and people following this session. My name is Charles Olwene Mulozi. I work with Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa as advocacy and campaigns coordinator. Alliance for Food Sovereignty is one of the biggest civil society movements in Africa. Things work in 50 countries across Africa. And we champion struggles for transitions to agroecology and food sovereignty. So I think this is a very interesting topic, Daniel, and it resonates with a number of things that Alliance for Sovereignty stands for. And whatever I'm saying right now, a preamble, is not the opinion of Alliance for Sovereignty right now in agroecology. I think this topic strongly resonates with a struggling or a failed food system that over time, right up from almost 1980s, when we started the structural adjustment programs with a number of other programs that has failed, the agro and a number of other initiatives. And the COVID itself, that has definitely shown us that we need a whole food has become part of the human's life. And we call about the wearing the inner mask to sustain and withstand challenges like pandemic like this. So it's a very interesting topic and quite rich topic. And I'm happy for those who decided to carve this topic for us to interact. So because of this failed system of food, the food system that we have been seeing globally, which has led to increased number of unemployment, especially in Africa, but also in terms of inequality and increased number of people becoming more poor and poorer and poorer. Also the issues about food insecurity, which is hardly heard of right in most part of African countries. So this conversation of transition to agroecology, the issue of supporting enterprises in Africa and the entrepreneurs, it is timely. And I think COVID has compounded it, become more interesting topic that should be put placed at a very high agenda at the global level. So because of this, in 2019, 2020, Alliance Food Sovereignty in Africa, together with the Agroecological Fund, they started to deepen this conversation that what are the key challenges that African agroecological enterprises could be facing, and how can we position it as a solution to have a more sustainable farming system, also have a farming system which can demonstrate a little bit of equitable kind of income sharing among the different players, but above all can deal with a little bit of a challenges on employment that we have in Africa. For example, I'm Ugandan. Mostly almost 75% of our citizens are in agriculture, but there's no any clear system and structures for support as Judith has put it in our farming system. So because of this, we decided to do research, a 1-year collaborative research with Agroecological Fund, which focused on analyzing the existing African agroecological entrepreneurs and service providers, and to understand their roles and relationship to agroecological movement and markets. And all this is probably to help us see how we can use enterprises as an avenue of promoting a sustainable farming system, but also provide equitable income distribution among the different stakeholders. So after the 1 year, and also I need to make that I've made this presentation somewhere, and so if someone has been part, could be some little bit of editing, but I've made this presentation in another forum. So if you have already interacted, the findings will be good also to take some of the new ideas. So after a long conversation with the more than 200 entrepreneurs across African continent and number of service providers and government, the research made some compelling evidence in terms of revelation, in terms of the state of enterprises or agroecological enterprise in Africa. First and foremost, most of these are very diverse, and there are many. There are farmer growers, cooperatives, agroecological processors, urban backyard gardens, and private companies. NGOs are all part of these, involved in all aspects of the entrepreneurship. Also, another interesting thing that they involve in varied activities in terms of productions, processing, farm input, farm infrastructure, and all these other broader stuff. But another shocking revelation from the research in terms of revenue, that the revenue per year, most of these businesses, almost 59%, they have 59%, like they have almost less than 49 annual income amidst all the struggles they're putting in place, which is a big challenge. And some of them have been in business for more than 11 years, which is quite interesting to understand the kind of the enterprises we have. And also that the service providers involved in supporting African agroecological enterprises, mainly the investors, accelerators, banks, technical assistants, other NGOs work, but also was able to make some revelation about the challenges which in relations to the supporting enterprises. One, in terms of the investors focus on increasing productivity and income as a success matrix rather than the whole value chain. Another challenge, investors do not differentiate between agribusiness, that agroecological or not. So people put their money with a certain conditionality you meet, and that is it. And in most cases, you find agroecological entrepreneurs who are in most cases are smallholder farmers. They struggle to access this money, but also the opportunities like the innovative service providers, which are funding many businesses under 200,000 US dollars, but also the innovative service providers that are successfully working with multiple partners in African continent. We're able also to make a finding about the innovators gaps that in terms of finance, which Judith elaborately talked about, that there's a significant lack of finance between 5,000 to 200,000 USD to support agroecological entrepreneurs in Africa. 80% of agroecological entrepreneurs are self-financed from personal or group saving. Probably 38 get some grants and 21 bank loan with very stringent conditionalities, which in most cases make it difficult for them to access this money. So some of the barriers which were deeply explained, for example, bank interest rate, which are very high. 30% is difficult for you to break even as a smallholder farmers. In most cases, smallholder farmers cannot get. Then the whole issue about perception agriculture as a food loan with a high risk make it very difficult for people to advance money to smallholder entrepreneurs. So as we talk today about the growing support for entrepreneurs, we need to reflect on some of these challenges. Then most donors launch pilots, but do not support through the whole value chain in the business circle. And this in most cases makes some of this business to get stunted or definitely collapse. The question of market, which Charles talked about, it was very, very strong. And markets, there's a lot of conditionality that resonate with trades. And our colleagues, friends from Europe and as well as America, they understand some of these things. That's been a long-term, more protracted struggle on the issues of trade laws and policies. So this kind of conversation remain a huge, huge challenge. Issues about fruits and vegetables, issues about the resilience of territorial market, issues about unappreciating the source of knowledge and expertise, and the questions of the territorial market don't differentiate agroecological production, and then lack of data. And there's already research that we started working on this. Be winding this shortly, then I'll end in a few minutes. Daniel, I hope I'm still within time. I don't want to go beyond the 7 minutes. Another interesting things which I will end with is about the role of women and young people. It's very central in any kind of policy conversation or institutional conversation that we need to have a conversation about the role of women and youth. Most of us who come from Africa, we understand the challenges young people face. In Uganda, where I stand, almost 75 to 80% after graduation, they have no job and the life they live for so long. Then the issues of enterprises and farming system become a good fallback position if this well institutionalized, well supported and given the right support. Then the women, they provide labor and they do everything, but in most cases you find the challenge in terms of putting sometimes the issues about the incentives that can support them, as well as in case of bad weather, and most of our farming system are still rain-fed. So if there's bad weather, everything's get washed out completely, and in most cases, then it's a lot of struggles to make a lot of stuff. The last and the most important challenges that came very strongly in terms of the research we did in collaboration with Agroecological Fund is the issues about unsupportive policy environment. I told you from 1980, when we started the structural adjustment, most African governments, especially, they have left agriculture in the hand of private individuals. And at the same time, most of them call agriculture the backbone of the economy. It's quite ridiculous. You cannot understand the economy and you live in the hand of private sector. And we have seen so many things. When Judith talked about confusions, a lot of contradictions and the challenges, because most government have handed it over in the hand of private. And the private individual, in most cases, their interest is profits. Not about the welfare. It's not about the sustainable farming system. It's not also about the interest of the farmer. It's about their personal interest. So as I conclude, we need extremely very reliable markets in terms of recommendation if we are to really harness the growth for supporting agroecological enterprise in Africa. A reliable market with a very clear, friendly trade policy. Uganda, for example, we produce coffee. This coffee have to go to Europe in form of coffee beans. We're not supposed to process. So this conversation, especially European friends and American, we need to start this conversation. If we are really honest to support these farmers to grow, there should be a little bit of whole transformation in the summer support system. If we are to deal with the income gaps, we're supposed to deal with the human rights, and we're supposed to deal with the dignity of smallholder farmers, especially in Africa. The access to loan remains very, very important in terms of conversation we need. a question of input. Having a robust conversation about promoting the biosafety and biotechnology law and bill in Africa. Can we support smallholder farms with what they have until they reach a level there where they can make a choice? Right now, they can't make a choice and make it very difficult. Last and the most important thing which I need to end with is a question about enabling legal and institutional frameworks. Most African governments, their focus mainly, I'm not a politician, is about elections. They buy more guns than seats. They recruit more soldiers than extension workers. And some of the Europeans, you have a very strong influence in terms of having a conversation with some of these states. For example, my own country, Uganda. Can we have a conversation of changing mindset if you are to achieve our desired goal of harnessing growth in terms of the access to agriculture and supporting agroecological enterprise, so that we have the legal institutional framework that can support smallholder farmers, not the big holder, the big holder farmers. With that, my sincere apologies for going beyond time, Daniel, and I beg to stop here, and I wish everyone a happy new year.
Thank you, Charles. Excellent. We can see it's getting dark there now in Uganda. No, that was really great. And all of the participants, I think you did really gave us a great overview of what's going on, and also kept time so that we have enough time now to open it up a bit and ask one another questions. I just want to say I appreciate, Charles Mulozi, the connection that you made there in your comments to Europe and to the US and the global trade and agriculture and the crazy trade rules that in fact dissuade or prevent African agroecological entrepreneurs from being able to successfully pursue their enterprises that are so important for well, the African food systems, but also for the global trade that, you know, as we all work for example, to support African farmers in fair livelihoods for their families, but also to mitigate all of the emissions that are caused by the global trade in agriculture as well. So I think, folks, I want to remind you that you are able to put questions in this chat at the bottom of your screen called Q&A. So please feel free to put questions in there. Also, you can use this chat function to make any questions or comments. And I don't know, I think you might be able to unmute yourselves. I don't know if that's a function that's enabled for participants. I'm just going to ask, I want to, you know, please feel free to jump in, anybody from the participants, and thank you again all for joining us today. But I want to give the opportunity as we wait perhaps for others to join in for Charles and Judith to converse with one another, perhaps ask each other questions or add details from their presentations that they'd like to hear a little bit more about. I could just say for my part, perhaps we can kick off, Judith, if you don't mind. I'd love to hear just a little bit more about some of the, you know, what was the impetus? How did you get started in your business, and what are some of the successes and challenges that you faced in growing your business?
Thank you so much, Daniel, for giving me some more time. Okay, if I pronounce the name, it might be hard. The name is Bosaino Fruits and Herbs. And Bosaino means very nice indeed. And the fruits are indeed nice, and the herbs. So the business started around the year 2000, and it was about consolidating the land that had been degraded and also starting the whole of growing the fruits. The whole area of herbs and trees came in later. We started with the fruits. And then as we kept progressing and talked to people, we added in the element of agriculture tourism and also agriculture education. And then it was during that transformation that we heard about permaculture and agroecology, and we went and did the training, because this is a family business, and we all went and did the training and then changed the farm to be on the principles of permaculture and agroecology. The farm is located in eastern Uganda, and we are working with smallholder farmers because in Uganda, found out that we have to work with the village if we are to succeed. And it's the village are our neighbors, and the neighbors are the small scale farmers. They own about 1 to 5 acres of land, and located in them, we are owning about 1,002 acres of land. So we work with the farmer on a symbiotic relationship where they come in and grow their plants, the beans, the peas, and the vegetables. And then they look after the fruit trees and the herbs as they are growing. But also we extend a lot of services to them. We do a lot of training. We provide them contract markets. For example, when they grow beans, we link them to buyers. So we have that symbiotic relationship. And now recently we've gone into herbs processing, where we are combining the seeds of fruits with our indigenous herbs. And we've started branding, labeling, and differentiating our products on the market. So that is one way as agroecological enterprises that we are now differentiating our products on the market. We are in the territorial markets, we are in the mass markets. We attend a lot of exhibitions and trade fairs until when COVID disrupted some of that. We are on the social media. We have a website. So we call ourselves medium-sized enterprises, and we are playing a catalyst role where we link the micro enterprises, the small enterprises, the small scale farmers to policy environment, to potential funding. So that is our role that we are working on as enterprises. We are happy we've been recognized internationally, nationally, as people who are doing pioneering into agroecology and permaculture in Uganda. I think that is brief. People can ask the rest of the questions.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Judith. Well, why don't Charles Mulozi and Charles Dhewa, please feel free to add your own comments, reflections, any questions you might have for your fellow panelists.
Yes. Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks, Judith. It's good to see a woman leading some of these things. What we have seen is that in the corporate world, especially in most of Zimbabwe and other countries, when you rise up on the corporate ladder, usually the business gets hijacked by men. They are the ones we take over and starts running the business. For instance, all the processing of groundnuts, you find that while it's still rudimentary, it's the domain of women. But once it's mechanized now, you find companies running with it. So already women are being left behind. So maybe I find the gender angle very important, even the one that Charles Milose was mentioning, to say women are part of this. One of the things that I face is to do with the aggression needed in marketing. I know no one will just hand you a market on a silver platter. It's really, you are competing with the world and everyone, and it's really big. And I assume, Judith, you have a very strong marketing department or thrust. Is that, am I correct?
Yes, yeah, we put up marketing, and we are doing a lot of things in joint action with others, because we formed like a national avocado platform. We are working with the National Agroforestry Institute, especially with the jackfruit, where we are promoting now jackfruit to become a national crop. Yes, thank you. Put up a marketing section.
Daniel, I may come in just quickly. I think is this a question or a comment? There's something here for you, Daniel.
Okay, I'll check.
Yeah, you first check that before I come in.
No, please go ahead. I'll read this through.
No, I just want to contextualize this conversation of growing support for African agroecological enterprises. For me, this is a magic bullet. If we want to deal with the whole crisis in Africa, in terms of poverty, in terms of income inequality, but also in terms of making responsive governance. Farmers are left in Africa in most cases, like especially smallholder agroecological farmers, they're left like they're orphans. There's nobody. Actually, the middlemen make money out of them because the state decided to distance themselves. And part is about the global policy challenges that Judith talked about. So the global leaders need to have a reflection. And for me, I strongly believe that any magic bullet of transformation in Africa is through the African supporting the African agroecological enterprises, because it's where a majority of African citizens are, and it's where government, in most cases, don't want to be part of it. The African government, they will wait after 5 years, or depending on their election cycles, to go and buy them off with a packet of salt, not even $1, and then they get their 5 terms of office. So if there's a honest global conversation, to have this kind of conversations, growing support for the supporting African agroecological entrepreneurs or enterprises, this will transform a whole narrative about the governance structure in Africa, and also change the whole narrative in terms of some of the leaders that want to live for long because they know how to play around with poor people. Because the poverty is part of the farming system and also part of the global challenges, because farming and food has become a big economic game or economic transaction. So we need to start appreciating that first of all, these are human beings. To live a dignified life, we need to have a conversation. If a farming system that is sustainable, but also can pay them to live a dignified life, and a life that they can make a transformation in the world. So therefore, it's a very interesting topic, and I look forward to having this kind of conversation, but also to see what action plan can come and a conversation that happen beyond this forum.
Beautiful, thank you, Charles. And I should add, maybe Charles Mulozi we haven't mentioned this yet, but as part of the continuing work to support this vibrant sector of agroecological entrepreneurs, the Alliance for Food Sovereignty is planning on convening in Africa a gathering of agroecological entrepreneurs and service providers in Africa. So stay tuned for that later on in the spring. The question that was posed on the chat, I think, is really interesting, and let me read it for all in case you aren't able to see it. Thank you to all 3 speakers for your valuable insights. Do any of you have any comments on how to build agroecological labels or other national and local market recognition without competing with organic markets? Organic and agroecological producers share a lot of common interests in changing mindsets and policies, but it's not always. So that's very interesting. I think it's also interesting in the case of Uganda specifically, which I know is quite a leader in organic production and marketing for the global organic markets. So how does that work? How does that interact, do you think? I imagine, Judith, you might have some insight into this about organic labeling and/or agroecological labeling, and how do you differentiate from the producer side and to the consumer? How do you make that all clear in the market? Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for appreciating our presentations and for that question. I think this is a developing area, and as we had mentioned earlier, that we are still in the process of even developing the standards. But we are working together and taking a step at a time to do the labeling, especially bringing out issues of recognition on the label, that this is climate smart, environmental friendly, and also the colors that we use on the label. But it's a developing area where we usually come together, comment, and then move to the next level. So it's not yet put, it's still developing.
Charles Dhewa, have you encountered this question in your research, and what might you add to that?
Yeah, I think what I've seen is the organic side of things has been moving faster, but then we have agroecology coming on board. So this is where I think where I was talking about, the intellectual part of it. How do we explain things and so the difference and all that. But what I see is that part of it is to do with standards, which Judith was mentioning. Labeling is one thing, it's easy to label. Anyone can put a label on something, but maybe is it really what it is communicating or what? Maybe that's where standards are needed. Nutritionists coming on board so that a label is really meeting what it claims to be. If it says it's good for its vitamin A, or what does it really? So it's to do with consumers. What I've seen is that unless consumers are demanding some of the labeling and clarity, sometimes it becomes very difficult to really move ahead. That's what I've seen as a limitation, but I think it's very important really, but it ties in with the importance of standardization, boards that can really certify things to be agroecological. We're still struggling with that, to say, how do we differentiate what is agroecological and what is not? Most consumers really are not into that, but I think it's an area that needs development. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Charles. Well, we're running low on time, but I'm going to read through these two other very important questions that appeared on the chat and leave it to the panelists, perhaps for their final comments, and you can choose to reflect on any of these questions. So thank you, Jolene, for asking, what is your wish from European-based NGOs to support agroecological enterprises in Africa? Wow, that's a beautiful question. Always nice to be asked, what do you need and how can we support you? And then we have a very interesting question from Barbara. How much do any of you find that older agricultural practices have contemporary value? So thank you, Barbara, for that. So let me turn it back over. Let's start with Judith and then go around to the Charles and Charles for their comments. Judith, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much for your questions. I'll comment on the second question and leave the first one on NGOs with Charles. I'm saying if you look at indigenous practices, agricultural practices in Africa, and you look at what we are calling agroecology and permaculture principles, I think they build on African practices. It's what we were doing in the past, but over time got lost. We're doing diversifying our agriculture, we were integrating. Then time came and said monoculture is the best. So you find in my area, Eastern Uganda, where people have cut trees and they are just planting sugarcane and maize, and the land has deteriorated. So we are retracing our steps again to go back to what we did best. And I think if we can go back and retrace our steps, we can do even better.
Nice, thank you so much. And that's really helpful. Thank you, Judith. Let's see, let's go back to Charles Dhewa, and then we'll leave it to Charles Mulozi to close ourselves out. Well,
yes, I'll attempt to answer the one about what is the wish for the European NGO. I think the most important wish is to have a market for commodities. If we can have a European market, that's better. To me, that's more interesting. We've been trying to have Africans in the diaspora to try and market organic food, indigenous food, or agroecologically processed food. So I think creating a market would be super, really. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Charles Mulozi, and in fact, I'm wrong. We're doing great on time, so we will have one more opportunity to go around and hear any final comments. So please, Charles Mulozi, and we're not so constrained on time. Charles Mulozi.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and thank you, audience, for the full questions. The first thing is, are you neighbors? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you fine, yes. Go ahead.
Beautiful. The first question to work and you was learning about marketing or the whole marketing is part of the bigger conversation that we started. For example, I think Charles Dhewa is doing a very elaborate research about marketing, especially for agroecological products. And yes, all East African countries and most of African countries, they're at an evolving stage. they're at a very deeper stage of reflection in terms of the kind of system they have and the kind of system they need to involve. The question about online marketing, the issues about the middlemen, there are so many things that are grappling and people are having a conversation. Already AFSA is doing a very in-depth research in 6 countries, and the results will be out probably by the end of this month, and we'll be launching the report around May during the conference which Daniel talked about. So some of these things, the learning is going on, but at the same time, we need an enabling legal and institutional framework, first within the country and also cross-border, to help with this learning, but also appreciation of the process. What is your wish? I think Charles talked about it, but 2 other things I need to ask. One, the biggest support for agriculture in Africa comes from Europe and America. African government, they don't put any investment in agriculture, no any investment. So therefore, the kind of policies that are developed in Europe in terms of agriculture in Africa, it will cause a lot of transformation. So having a forum whereby African civil society organizations have conversation with the European civil society organization to understand. For example, in Uganda, we passed the Plant Variety Protection Act. We are now in the process of conversion of biosafety and biotechnology bill, which is mainly GMO bill. All this conversation does not address the local context. And this kind of conversation, the civil society organization in Europe can push. But also in terms of budget, we need money to transform agriculture in Africa. We need fair trade laws and trade policies and connection between Africa and Europe. So all, can you hear me now? Yeah, so I say there are 3 things just to add. The first one, which I'll talk about marketing. The African products or agroecological products, it's the base for immunity, build immunity and everything, and it's good for food and everything. So we need to market. 2, advocate for policy reforms from Europe, and at the same time, most of the policies in Africa are either imposed or influenced by either a corporate in Europe or a government in Europe. So having a platform to discuss with African civil society organization and kind of the policies we have. I talk about biosafety, biotechnology laws in most African countries. I'll talk about Plant Variety Protection Act. Most of these laws, they don't address the local context. They address interests of an individual or an interest of a corporate. So having a conversation to influence and push some of the regressive laws that are being imposed on Africa. The structural adjustment program has caused a lot of chaos in Africa that most are not willing to have this kind of conversation. But civil society organization can have this forum and push with the European Union, European Commission, and make sure that the laws which are imposed in Africa resonate with the challenges and address the challenges African civil society organizations are having. But most importantly, we need a forum where we can connect, and have a conversation. This will help to cause a total transformation in Africa.
Nice. Those are beautiful words of collectivity, of a union of all of us, of solidarity to make not just the African food system more sovereign, but to have a really sustainable and respectful food system globally. So there's plenty that we can all do. I want to offer a big thank you to Charles Mulozi, to Charles
Daniel,
Dhewa. Please go ahead.
No, just 1 minute. I think one thing I mentioned, I think my internet was breaking. The question about the trade laws, trade policies, and trade practices is a conversation that the European civil society organization needs to speak a conversation with African citizens or African civil society organization. Is having immense impact and is going to make Africa to be where it is or regressing backward instead of progressing.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I can add too that there's a lot of movement happening within the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, within the Committee on Food Security, and all of the European governments are, of course, within that. And please do, from wherever you sit, influence your governments to play a proactive role to advance agroecology through the UN system. So I think with that, we're going to shut it down. And again, an enormous thanks to Judith and Charles, and to all of you, our participants, and also a great big thanks to the Oxford Real Farming Conference. This is a terrific platform for us to get to know one another and share knowledge. So thank you for this opportunity. And we wish you a good evening, and we'll see you as the movement continues to grow strength in the years to come.